It was a warm May morning in 1944, a platform in southern Poland. The prisoners inside the cattle cars expected a monster. Instead, they met a smiling man. The heavy doors slid open with a screech. A wave of heat, vomit, and human filth hit the crisp spring air. Families stumbled out, blinded by the sun. 3 days without food, without water. The crowd was on the edge of panic. An SS officer stepped forward, blonde hair, a perfect uniform. One of his eyes was glass. It glittered in the sun as he scanned the new arrivals. He did not scream. He did not shoot. He raised a hand to quiet the crowd. He spoke about hygiene, about the dangers of lice. He promised hot soup, tea, and coffee waiting in the barracks. He pointed to the wall of hooks in the undressing room. 75, he might say, tapping the number. Remember where you left your clothes. The tension broke. Mothers hugged their children. The crowd exhaled. They walked willingly toward the underground chambers. This was the most efficient weapon in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Not the pistol, but the promise. Panic slows down the process. Hope speeds it up. From the moment he spoke about the soup to the moment the ventilation fans turned on, exactly 2 hours passed. The man on the platform was named Otto Moll. His actions at Auschwitz-Birkenau defied standard military classification. This was not just extermination, it was a performance. A calculated production of sadism so visceral that even hardened SS veterans stepped back. They physically could not stomach the sight. But the silence did not last. 18 months later, American prosecutors at the Dachau trials opened the file. This account relies on those documents. No rumors, no folklore, only cross-referenced survivor testimonies and military logs. The objective is not to scare, but to present the evidence. The source is the 30-volume record of the United States Army investigation. 30 years before the platform, the timeline starts in Hohenschönberg. It was March 4, 1915. Otto Moll was born into a quiet life. He was not a soldier, he was not a criminal, he was a creator. Moll attended a professional vocational school. He learned to prune trees. He learned to nurture soil. He graduated as a certified gardener. Then came 1935. The shears were traded for a uniform. Moll joined the SS. But he did not start with a rifle. He started with a trumpet. He joined the marching band. Hear the brass, the rhythmic thump of the drum, bunt marches echoing off the brick walls of the barracks. Moll played music while the architecture of terror was built around him. He was an ordinary man. He was a neighbor, a diploma for flowers, a uniform for death. The gardener became the executioner. In 1933, Hitler seized absolute power. The infrastructure of terror followed immediately. First, Dachau, then a sprawling network of 44,000 camps and incarceration sites across Europe. Was this cruelty innate? The answer came from doctors after the accident near Bernau. Late 1930s, the road to Oranienburg. An SS truck slammed head-on into a civilian vehicle. Metal screamed against metal. One officer died instantly. Otto Moll was dragged from the wreckage with a fractured skull. The recovery room smelled of iodine and blood. Weeks of blindness. When the bandages came off, a glass prosthetic filled the right socket. It stared back without blinking. But the glass eye was just a cosmetic scar. The real injury was inside. Severe trauma to the frontal lobe destroys the brain's braking mechanism. Impulse control vanishes. Aggression spikes. Medical examiners confirmed the damage had permanently erased his capacity for empathy. From 1938, Sachsenhausen became the testing ground for his new persona. Prisoners did not know about the brain damage. They only saw the face. Short blonde hair, a chiseled jaw, and a pair of cold blue eyes. But only one of them moved. The other was glass. A fixed, dead stare that never blinked. Survivor Benjamin Jacobs later wrote that when he spoke, only the live eye shifted. It was a mask of total indifference. Inside the camp, the stakes were high. Among the inmates was Lieutenant Yakov Jugashvili, the eldest son of Joseph Stalin. The Nazis viewed him as a premium asset. They offered to exchange him for Field Marshal Paulus, captured at Stalingrad. Stalin refused. His reply was cold logic. "I do not trade a marshal for a lieutenant." Yakov died in the camp. In this environment, Moll ran the gardening detail. It sounded routine, almost invisible, but his efficiency was absolute. It caught the attention of the camp's leadership, specifically Rudolf Höss. Höss was preparing for a new assignment, a project destined to become the largest extermination facility in history. He needed men capable of anything. When the transfer orders came for Auschwitz, Höss added Moll to the list. On May 2, 1941, the train brought him to the point of no return. Otto Moll arrived at Auschwitz. But his moral atrophy had started long before the platform. In 1940, his first wife died of blood poisoning. Moll didn't grieve, he replaced her. He remarried within weeks and moved his new wife and 2 daughters directly into the camp perimeter. Domestic bliss ran parallel to the machinery of death. From the living room, the family looked out at the chimneys. Black, oily smoke coated the windows where his daughters slept. Inside the wire, Moll capitalized on his deformity. His glass eye never blinked. Prisoners whispered his name, Cyclops. But his brutality required a more specific title, Schweinemetzger, the pig butcher. Most guards treated violence as a job. Moll treated it as a craft. There were thousands of SS personnel in the complex, but Moll stood alone. He was the one man the killers themselves feared. He didn't have to wait long. Immediately after the transfer, he received command of a sector where the law ceased to exist. June 1942. The location was Block 11, the penal company. The mechanics were absolute. Prisoners arrived for minor infractions. A few words to a civilian, a hidden slice of bread. The ledger listed sentences from 1 month to 1 year, but the paperwork was a fiction. Block 11 was a hermetic seal. From the outside, passing inmates heard only the sounds: the heavy thud of wood on bone, the dragging of chains against concrete. Almost no one left that building. If they did, they left on a cart. Moll stepped into this vacuum. He optimized it. As the orders came down to expand the camp into a factory, he moved from the cells to the gas. He personally directed the operations at Crematorium 1 and the makeshift Bunker 1. But the scale required 2 men. To manage the quota, the SS appointed Franz Hassler as his partner. Block 11 worked perfectly, but the earth refused to cooperate. While the execution wall supplied fresh bodies, the soil around the converted farmhouses of Bunker 1 and Bunker 2 reached a saturation point. 100,000 corpses lay in shallow graves. Decomposition fluids seeped through the clay. The gray sludge poisoned the groundwater. The camp's wells turned toxic. Even the SS families living in the clean villas outside the wire began to retch and fall ill. Moll was the solution. From September to November 1942, he commanded the cleanup. The orders were absolute. Tear open the earth. Drag out the wet, disintegrating remains. Burn them on open pyres. He stood in the smoke for 3 months, directing the eradication of evidence. Berlin noticed the efficiency. On April 20, 1943, Adolf Hitler's 54th birthday, Moll reported to the Kommandantur in his dress uniform. The ceremony was exclusive. Commandant Rudolf Höss stepped forward holding a silver cross. It was the War Merit Cross First Class with swords. Technically, this medal was reserved for bravery on the front lines, for officers holding positions against enemy fire. In Auschwitz, the criteria changed. Moll received it not for combat, but for logistics. Only Höss and 1 other officer in the entire camp complex held this specific honor. The contrast was absolute. On his tunic, 2 crossed bronze swords symbolized knightly warfare. In reality, they represented 70 days of burning rot in a muddy field. That afternoon, the commandant and his favorite executioner stood side by side and saluted. The War Merit Cross on his chest was an advance payment. It was a contract for a logistical nightmare the Reich considered impossible. How do you process 10,000 bodies every 24 hours when the ovens are rated for only 1,000? May 1944. 147 trains, 56 days, 440,000 Hungarian Jews arrived at the ramp. That is the entire population of a city like Miami or Minneapolis. Delivered to a single location, erased in less than 2 months. The brick crematoria choked on the volume instantly. The machinery failed. So Otto Moll turned to basic physics. He ignored the manuals and grabbed a shovel. He sketched a new system on paper. Laborers dug massive open-air pits behind Crematorium 5. Moll graded the earth to create a specific slope. As the pyres burned, human fat liquefied. It flowed down the engineered channels into boiling catch basins. The Sonderkommando scooped it up in iron ladles. They poured the boiling fat back over the corpses to accelerate the fire. It was a self-sustaining cycle. The smoke was different here. Heavy, black, greasy. It blotted out the sun over Birkenau and coated the camp in a layer of soot that tasted like iron. 80% of the arrivals never received a tattoo. No registration, no paper trail. They went from the train to the pit without ever becoming a statistic. Moll stood by the edge of the fire, watching the efficiency of his design. He had found his true vocation. To keep the throughput at maximum, panic was strictly forbidden. The victims had to walk to the slaughter on their own 2 feet. Moll understood this better than anyone. On the platform, he didn't scream, he spoke. His voice was soft, composed, almost warm. He moved through the crowd of terrified families like a solicitous host. He told them this was a work camp. He promised hot soup and rest. He pointed to the numbered hooks on the wall. "Remember your number," he advised. "You'll need it to retrieve your clothes." The precision of the lie broke their resistance. Some were so relieved they asked for paper. They scribbled hasty farewell notes to relatives in Budapest, handing them to the SS officer for safe posting. Moll took them all with a nod. The letters were thrown into the fire along with the bodies. The scraps of paper with family addresses were confiscated the moment the vehicle appeared. It looked like salvation. A white ambulance with a bright Red Cross emblem. Using this symbol for combat or execution was a direct violation of the Geneva Convention. In Birkenau, it was just a prop. SS physician Johann Kramer watched the process daily. His diary later surfaced as key evidence at the Nuremberg trials. He described a precisely choreographed performance. The goal was panic control. The ambulance delivered the sick directly to the bunker. The heavy doors slammed shut. The bolts slid home. Then the vents opened. Purple-blue pellets of Zyklon B rattled down the shafts. Death took between 3 and 15 minutes. Otto Moll stood outside the entrance and checked his watch. But standing by the door quickly became boring. He needed participation. Moll walked up to a trembling child. In his palm lay a piece of candy, bright white sugar against the filth of the camp. The child stopped crying, reached out. Dirty fingers touched the wrapper. Moll smiled. Then he grabbed the arm and threw the living child into the burning pit. The mother watched. This was no longer industrial processing. It was personal entertainment. Survivors told tribunals the same story. Moll lifting toddlers by their hair, holding them in midair. One shot. When a 3-year-old fell off a transport truck, Moll didn't help. He swung the child by the legs, smashed the head against a concrete wall, tossed the limp body back into the mother's lap. He trained his German shepherd to hunt naked women, to bite their legs and herd them into the fire. When a member of the Sonderkommando tried to hide a gold ring, a bullet was too merciful. Moll doused the man in gasoline, lit the match himself. To every plea for mercy, he gave the same mechanical answer. Befehl ist Befehl. An order is an order. He repeated it right up until January 1945. How do you hide 60,000 witnesses? The SS decided to walk them into the grave. While the Red Army occupied empty barracks in January 1945, the living evidence was marching west. This was not an evacuation, it was a mobile execution. 60,000 people, the population of a city, driven into the Polish winter without food. Their destination was Kaufering, a network of 11 camps where prisoners built their own cages. Mud huts, Earthen roofs. Rain dissolved the ceilings. Out of 30,000 who passed through Kaufering, 15,000 did not live to see spring. But cold was too slow for Otto Moll. In April, as American artillery rumbled in the distance, he forced the survivors back onto the road. The final march to Dachau. Moll took the rear guard. He wasn't herding sheep, he was culling the flock. He watched the line. A prisoner stumbled. Knees hit the ice. Moll did not shout. He walked up behind the kneeling man, raised his pistol. One shot to the nape of the neck. The body hit the frozen earth with a dull, heavy thud. Moll stepped over the corpse and kept walking. He did this 26 times, 26 personal executions on the side of the road. He arrived at Dachau on April 28th. The timing was impeccable. The very next morning, the U.S. 7th Army breached the gates and found 32,000 living skeletons. Among the 32,000 survivors, one man tried to disappear into the chaos. He didn't make it past the first screening. November 1945. The U.S. Military Tribunal at Dachau. The courtroom created a bizarre legal paradox. Otto Moll stood accused, but not for the industrial slaughter of millions. The prosecution ignored the gas chambers. They focused on 26 specific bullets, the ones Moll fired personally during the march. Justice was bureaucratic. They couldn't prove the crematoria yet, but they had witnesses for the 26 bodies left on the Bavarian ice. They held him at Landsberg prison. The irony was heavy. This was the fortress where Adolf Hitler dictated Mein Kampf 2 decades earlier. The Nazi Bible was written in these cells. Now, its most efficient practitioner waited to die in them. Moll played the victim. He told the court he was a soldier just following orders. The judges saw a sadist who shot stragglers for sport. On May 28, 1946, the 31-year-old climbed the 13 steps. The hangman pulled the lever. The corpse hanging in the prison yard did not belong to a mythical monster. It belonged to a gardener. Before the war, Otto Moll planted flowers. He played music. He was a nobody. But the regime took this mediocrity and gave him a new purpose. In 56 days, the system demanded the destruction of 440,000 Hungarian Jews at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Moll accepted the task. He treated genocide like landscaping. Survivors recalled the image vividly. Moll standing by the pits, a handful of candy in his palm. He used the sweets to call children out of the crowd. He proved that absolute evil requires no supernatural power, just a willing man and an order. The transcripts of his cruelty are not folklore. They are physically stored in the permanent archives of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial.